Hi guys. How again in the house. Slightly different attitude because I'm getting ready to teach my Zumba class. This is my office. I've just moved all the furniture so that we can teach the class. Unfortunately, it's a little bit dark down here. It's dark this morning. I have a little extra light, and this is my office. Now, when I was thinking about doing this video, this next class, and what's happening when I'm teaching this course is that I do one, and then the next idea sort of kind of comes through. And I was thinking, I need to do about business. I need to do about livelihood. I need to do about money. I need to do about all these things. What's the word? What's the expression? How do I use this word? And who am I to teach this? And this morning, the word came, and it was work. And it's so simple because we have worked. Work has been around for thousands of years. And even if we don't have what we might call a profession, even if we don't have what we might call a job, most of us, probably all of us, have something that we do that we could call work. So it could be housework, or it could be the work of going to the shop. And it could be, and it doesn't mean to say you don't like it just because we call it work. A lot of us love what we do and how we work. A lot of us would do it for free, if we could, absolutely. And sometimes the work is just the work of getting healthy. Sometimes the work is the work of doing the exercise, or taking the medicine, or following the program, or just resting. Resting, in a weird paradoxical way, can be work. And for some of us, actually, those of us who like to be busy, being quiet and resting can feel like the hardest work of all. To not do something can be the hardest thing, which is very Zen. And what I want to speak to is a great teacher of mine yesterday, Don Miguel Ruiz, who has his communion that he did yesterday on Easter Sunday, is I think on YouTube. It's very powerful, and it's a bit. And one of the things that he said was, the old world is gone. We move on today in a new world. And there's a part of me that didn't want to hear that, and there's a part of me that felt it, But there's a truth in that every day, that we're constantly moving forward. And people who are in one kind of job and very successful have to then, somebody kept saying pivot, we have to switch and change. Sometimes we have to go back to different kinds of work. And I never expected to be doing this. I never expected to be teaching Zumba in this house. But it was funny because I spent months practicing Zumba because I was working on my own rehab. And so I want to try and bring together so many different concepts about work and business and this kind of thing. And I've already seen some adverts for sort of big business conferences that were all going online, and got all these speakers talking about things. And I've been to the business show in London. I've been to lots of stuff. And to be honest, when I was kind of in my life before this virus crisis happened, one of the things that I was saying to myself even last year was, I need to master business. I need to master what's going on. I need to understand. I need to be successful. And of course, then I wrote a book called Fear of Success. And I always talk about success as being true to ourselves. But sometimes we have to go and we have to do some work we don't like. We have to clean the bathroom. We have to do some things that I have to do my taxes. Nobody likes that. Well, maybe somebody does. I don't know. But what is very interesting is how we understand the concept of work, the concept of business, even something like the concept of the economy. And I wrote a very heavy book just last year about financial thriller, which was all about the way that the economy and stocks and shares work and things like that. And it was a fiction book, so it was kind of dramatic. to kind of get you through what a lot of people might fall asleep during when we try and talk about things like how businesses work and what kind of businesses there are, what kind of corporations there are and things like that. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into that. If you're interested in that kind of thing, go read that book. It's probably quite an eye-opener for a lot of people. But before that, I remember at one time when I was working in a business, and I was reading a lot of Buddhist books, and I was trying to understand a concept. And one of the concepts in Buddhism, and probably in most types of ways of thinking, is a concept called right livelihood, which means making money in a good or an ethical or a fair way. That sounds really simple, right? But it depends what you mean by those words, fair and ethical. And if I would read one book, it would say, well, that just means not stealing. That means just not lying. That means just not committing fraud. So that's one way of looking at right livelihood, And another way of looking at it is to do no harm. So, for example, actually it's quite interesting, this came up recently. A man was fired from a charity. This is a bit vague, so you have to check this out. Fired from a charity that was an animal rescue and animal welfare charity, because he blew the whistle on the fact that their pension fund was being invested in companies that tested on animals. So for many people, they might not care if their pension fund is invested in companies that test on animals. But for the people who are donating to that particular charity, that was quite an important thing. And we can see that the bigger a business gets, or the bigger an organisation gets, even a charity organisation, the more important it is that certain types of integrity are maintained, certain types of rules are followed. And I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing when I'm trying to teach freedom is rules, freedom, freedom, rules. But in this one, I think you can see quite clearly that to set a rule that a company that is, or a charity that is supposed to be doing something, should really be trying to avoid investing or having anything to do with stuff that its customers, and I think for a charity it's kind of weird because you've kind of got two sort of customers with a charity. You've got the people who are giving money to the charity, and you've got the people who are being served by the charity. So it's probably more complicated for them. You know what I mean? Like for me, my business tends to be quite simple in that most of the time I have a customer and they pay me. And that makes things reasonably simple for me in a lot of ways. My job is to treat them fairly. It doesn't always mean, telling them what they want to hear. Because especially when I'm working as an editor, I might have to say a lot of things that they don't want to hear. And that's quite an interesting experience. So, but to serve someone sometimes means telling them what they don't want to hear. Serve someone sometimes means telling somebody no. And that's quite an interesting experience. So I think, well, why should I be teaching this thing about work? I think, well, I kind of have had my own business for about 10 years this year. And before that, I worked for a lot of different companies. And it's funny because I lived in the same house for 22 years, and then I went travelling, and I added up that I'd stayed in 130 different places in a year. It's a lot of places. And it certainly wasn't my plan when I started. But before I had my last sort of proper job, I stayed in that job for about 3 years. And before that, I had a lot of jobs. I couldn't even tell you how many jobs I had, because I was working sometimes in industries like filmmaking when, it might only be like 1 day work or 2 days work. for a project. And I did a lot of temping, and so, I might just be temping for a week or a month. And I want to come back to that because yesterday I was talking about freedom in terms of the body, and I was talking about the ways that we restrict ourselves and we talk about who and what we do, what we are, and we sort of lock ourselves in. And perhaps one of the most important things that we can learn and we can gain from a type of freedom now, from understanding freedom, is to not lock ourselves in terms of what our work is or how we work. And so yesterday I was talking about certain sort of categories we might put ourselves in terms of our body: male, female, our skin colour, even things like we might think of our nationality as being part something to do with our body. My body was born in this country, and so therefore I am a citizen of this country, whatever. And it was very interesting to me when in the UK, one of the first aspects of the response to this virus and to this emergency was to look at finance, to look at financials and saving the economy. And so, without judgment, let me speak about that, or without too much judgment. So the first thing that they said was, let's have a plan for all the businesses. And so let's have a plan for all the businesses. And we're going to give you this furlough payments and things like that. Okay. And then the cry went up, what about all the self-employed people? And they said, okay, we're going to come up with another plan for the self-employed people. And in the meantime, they said, well, look, we'll give a little boost to universal credit, which is our sort of welfare system for those people who can't work. And then in the meantime, they said, yeah, we've got this statutory sick pay, and we've got this ways of reporting if people are sick or disabled or can't work. Okay, quick, let's change that. Let's make it so that people just have to go online and say they're sick, and we'll accept that. And we better change the amount of money. So statutory sick pay more than doubled, because it was like, okay, suddenly the sick pay is we want people to stay home if they're sick, instead of making the assumption that everybody who says they're sick is some kind of malingerer and we want them to get back to work as quick as possible. Let's change this assumption, and we say, right, we're assuming if you're sick, we want you to stay home. So we need to change the system for that to work. And then there came this sort of self-employed package, and it was like, okay, self-employed means this. It doesn't mean that. You have to have this. You have to have that. Okay. And then a lot of people went, okay, well, better go and sign up to the benefits. And that includes me. Because you think, well, this isn't going to work for me. This isn't, they obviously don't understand what self-employment is and how it works at all. So, and the interesting thing in the UK, in the last, however, quite recently, about 500,000 people have applied for universal credit, which is our welfare system. And it kind of works out to about, for a single person, they've changed it. It's not as bad as it was. Depending on what your housing is, you could be getting, around maybe about £1,000 a month to get you through. And if you think in the UK we don't have to pay for our healthcare, we have to pay for prescriptions and things like that. But if we need to go to hospital, that's covered. So that's, we could survive. A lot of us could survive on that, especially if we have money saved or, we have friends and family we can lean on. But the interesting thing is that for the furlough payments and for the self-employed payments, the cap on it is £2,500 a month, which is taxable. So it's really about £2,000. It's about double. So it's a bit like, and my way of looking at this is first class lifeboats, second class lifeboats, steerage, But saying that, I know that we're much, much better off than we are in other countries. So, not wanting to rehash what's going on at the moment, the reason I'm talking about this is because there's a concept of how do I label what I do? How do I label how I work? How do I label? And if I have a profession, am I restricted by that? I'm a fitness instructor, yes. But I'm many other things. I do many other things as well. And I have other skills I can fall back on. So some of those have been useful. But before I stopped working for another big business, I worked in the finance industry for a lot of years. And I've worked temping in a lot of companies for a lot of years. And what's very interesting is, and it's kind of a weird one actually, because I also had this in Paris and in France as well. And we see this a lot in the States, of how people are employed and what we might consider to be its work, but it's also kind of right employment. So for example, I worked in the city, I worked in finance for a long time, worked for big banks. And I would go in and work on a temporary contract. So I would be working, on an hourly rate, but it was very good money. And I just went in and I got that job and I didn't think too much about it, and I was working away. And one of the things that would often happen is that people would be let go of at the end of about a year, because the government tried to change things to say, well, once somebody's been working for you as a temporary worker for a year, you need to hire them. You need to make them a staff member. And you can see exactly why that system of working will have left a lot of people in the lurch in this crisis. Because when you're a temp worker, you don't get sick pay. When you're a temp worker, you wouldn't be allowed to have been furloughed in the first class lifeboats. You might have been on PAYE, which is what we call it, when we pay our taxes as we go along. It's every chance you were, but you still might have been working through an agency. Which means when something like this happens, the big company goes, not my problem, not my staff member. I don't have to pay this person any severance pay. I don't have to give them any notice. They come to work and they say, sorry, that pass doesn't work. You can't work here anymore. You can't come in the building. But I've been working for a year. I've been working for 6 months. And this is one of the issues that have been coming up. There's a lot of people who may have started a salaried role, a week before, and yet the company may well, and I actually was in this situation, I've been in this situation more than once, where, and one of the other things that happened in businesses I work for is that I would work for about a year. At the end of the year, what would happen is that they would switch me over to a different temporary agency. Was it legal? No, not really. Was it a loophole? Yeah. And recently there's been a thing in the UK where the government's been trying to push, change laws to say people are not self-employed, they're employed by a company. And you could argue, a lot of self-employed people are arguing, no, we don't, we want to be self-employed, we're contractors, this is how we work. But you can also see why they might be trying, the government has tried to close a loophole. Because I was that loophole. I was working full-time for a company, and actually the last company I worked for, I contracted for them as a self-employed person for, I think it was actually over a year. I think it might have been illegal, the way that we were working. But I had said I'd agreed to a permanent contract quite a while back. And this was about 2007, 2008. I think, I really was with them for quite a long time. I think it was over a year. And one of the things, and this happened to me in Paris as well. So I'm working for a company, and and they say, yeah, we want you to stay, we want you to be permanent, you're doing a great job. We don't have the headcount. in our department. So you need to keep being self-employed. You need to keep being temporary because we don't have the headcount. So basically the company is saying that you need to break the country's law because the corporate law, because the office, the job, the company has a rule that we can't break. We don't have the headcount. So you have to keep working in this insecure way. You have to keep working in a way that you don't get sick pay. You don't get holiday pay. You don't get anything if things go wrong. And I finally agreed and signed my permanent contract with them. I think it was like a day before then the company turned around and said, no, we're not hiring anybody, because this was the time of the 2008 recession. And then they suddenly had to make loads and loads of people redundant in the business. So all those people who were made redundant obviously got quite a big payoff, and a lot of them were quite happy. And from that point I was like, look, I'm permanent now, make me redundant, I'll take the money, that's fine. But literally I was one day from being that temporary worker that suddenly has no job, no sick pay, no severance. So I've been there. And so it's kind of funny. I didn't expect to be talking about this in this. I expect to be talking about a lot of deeper principles. But it is something that's happened now and something that we need to be aware of as we move forward, that there are many, many people working who have been working in the most vulnerable jobs, working in our key worker jobs. You know, there are lots of nurses who are working, lots of people who have been working in hospitals under forms of contract. And sometimes they've had to go into a temping way of working rather than being permanent within, say, the NHS, because the permanent, actually working for the organisation meant that they weren't getting the protection that they needed. And I'm not talking about the PPE, I'm talking about other things. So in a weird way there, in a lot of companies, people have to become self-employed, because when they're seen as an employee, they're not respected, they're not treated well. They're told, no, you can't take holiday, no, you have to work like this, you have to work like that. And one of the great things that I've found working for myself is being able to set my own rules about certain things. And when I first started out being a fitness instructor, I expected to work in gyms. I really expected to go and work for gyms. And unfortunately, fortunately for me, that didn't happen. Fortunately, it didn't work out that way. And it was good for me because of the people I worked for, the gyms were the worst people to try and get any money from. And also the worst people in terms of providing information on how I should be teaching and what I was supposed to be doing and what any of the guidelines were for safety and that kind of thing. And very often, and I know a lot of stories from a lot of instructors that I know, if there was a problem with a customer in the gym, they would go and complain about the class, or they would complain, or they would behave in a certain way. And the gym's attitude to the instructor was pretty much, well, you've got to suck this up. The customer is king. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of teachers and a lot of people who work in many places. Maybe you're a waiter, maybe you work in a business, and you get a customer who's rude or unpleasant, and the business will be saying, oh no, the customer's always right, the customer's always right. And the great thing about being my own boss, I had to follow the rules of the venues where I worked. So I had to do things like health and safety and whatever they required, and if I was doing a job for somebody, I would have to do that. But generally I got to follow my own heart. And if I had a person in the class who was very disruptive, I could just ask them to leave. I could just say, I'm sorry, but, So I got to be the boss. I got to be the boss of my class. And I did listen. Of course I listened to the people in my class. But I didn't have to change things and make things different just because I had one person who didn't like things. And that's the sort of model within a lot of gyms, a lot of businesses. If we get one customer who complains about something, the business will adjust and take that suggestion, take that recommendation, even though that's one person and everyone else in the class is very happy with things. So for example, with me, if somebody made a complaint about something, if somebody said, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, I would look at everybody else and I would say, let me ask through everybody else. Let me check before I make a big switch. And I find that even with an organisation like Zumba, they're a very big organisation, and they do try to be responsive to the people who they work for. Their job is to make Zumba instructors successful. So the Zumba instructors are the boss, which is great. Aside from things like dealing with music licensing and stuff like that, where they have to deal with the legalities of things. But one of the things I have found is that if they decide to do something, if a Zumba organisation decides to do something, sometimes there's a very vocal group of people that complain and want things to go a certain way. And sometimes the Zumba organisation goes, oh, okay, we're going to do it. And it doesn't really balance out with the many, many people who were silent because they were quite happy with things. They wanted things to go that way. They liked it like that. Which reminds me of a great salsa song called I Like It Like That. Which I can't play in my class because of music restrictions and music. I can only use the Zumba music. So there's a lot of things within the way that we work that we have to we don't have an absolute freedom necessarily to do things in a certain way. But it's very important, especially at the moment, that we look at what are we free to do? What can we do? And that's so important because I look around and I see so many businesses doing great, great things. And I have to say, just before this, in February, I went as a magazine editor to cover London Fashion Week. And I had the most incredible time. I met the most amazing people. And I was so surprised because I'd kind of gone into it thinking that people would be rude and snotty and they wouldn't be very nice to me. And oh my goodness, everybody was so lovely. Apart from one girl with a clipboard, she was a bit snotty. But everyone else was really super. And so I made friends with a lot of people. I followed a lot of people. And I even wrote a big article about, fashion with what was going on with this virus. I obviously had no idea what was about to happen. And it was very much about, how things were starting to shift in terms of fashion and the industry. And it's a very complicated and interesting industry. It's like the food industry. It's global. It affects a lot of people. And in a way, even more so because we can have people who are stitching garments in very poor countries for very rich countries. And we can have designers who are producing clothing that's very, very expensive. But, they're using ethical fabrics, they're doing things in a certain way. And then we can have all kinds of things. And what I loved is I had all these people that I was following, fashion people, and I went on and I started unfollowing people because a lot of people were just still doing the same, show me in this dress. And I might have been a bit judgmental about that. I might have been making a bit of an assumption. But what I suddenly saw was the British Fashion Council, who were reaching out to all the people who make clothing to say, can we make PPE? Can we make masks? Can we make medical can we make this protective gear? And it's interesting actually because one of the designers who I met at London Fashion Week, I think probably the first one I spoke to, it was actually a pattern cutter for medical clothing. So that was his day job. He was I think he called it engineering. It's a form of engineering to plan and to cut these kind of garments. And that was amazing. And then more and more I would see certain designers who were saying, especially in the States, right, this is great because we're not going to put our staff on, we're not going to let go any of the staff who are working here, especially if it's, the manufacturing was in the US. We're gonna make masks, we're gonna make PPE, we're gonna supply New York City, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. And it's just mind-blowing. And something really special in terms of saying, hey, this thing I've been doing, I can do it a different way. We have locally, we had a small shop, and they decided to, get some people on board and help them deliver to the vulnerable people locally. And those people delivering are not, they're not usually delivery drivers. They usually drive around doing something completely different. They got on board. And we're seeing that. And I'll just mention actually briefly the fashion side of things. It's been a very interesting time to look at all the different people who I know at different organisations and businesses around the world and the way they've reacted to this crisis. And the biggest thing I would say is, I am not my job. I am not my business. I'm an individual that has maybe a company and I have certain skills and I can do certain things. But I think the thing is, if we go into things with an attitude of, I'm not restricted by some concept of who and what I do, that gives us the freedom to help and to serve when we can. And probably one of the best examples of that are the nurses and doctors who are working, who have no experience or very little experience with infectious diseases. So there are many nurses and doctors who have training who are not used to working in this kind of way. So, for example, they may be more used to working with chemo. They may be more used to working with people who've had strokes or brain injuries. They may be more used to working with people who've got heart problems. But they're taking the experience and the qualifications that they have and using them in a different way. And that's pretty impressive. I don't think anyone would say any different. But coming back to work and looking at it in a bigger picture, and what I'm seeing on Instagram is I'm seeing still a lot of pictures, a lot of advertising. I'm still getting a lot of emails from people who I've signed up to before, when I was really exploring this world of business. And I was going out and I was signing up to lots of things, and should I be doing this way? Should I be doing that way? Should I be advertising? What kind of selling should I be doing? And I even get emails from a guy called Seth Godin, who's like the king of marketing, and he's quite interesting. And I'll come back to that. And some of his stuff's quite interesting. But what I'm seeing in a lot of these is still a thing of going towards the old goals, and of course, it's great to make money. It's great to be able to support yourself and to support your family. But these goals, are still coming at me, and they're like, how to be a millionaire this, how to make millions of pounds doing that, how to get this many followers, how to do this, how to get leads, how to target people, how to do this, how to do that. And I think, I just think maybe you're kind of sort of ignoring what's going on at the moment. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. But in a way, it's kind of an old-fashioned way of looking at things. And there are a lot of businesses who are kind of still staying in the mindset of where they were and what they're doing. Now, some of those businesses are having, I want to put this the right way, they're in demand. A lot of people are in demand. So, for example, a company like Vodafone, who I wrote some stuff about the other day because I had a bit of a problem with them. And when I went and looked, I thought, there's a lot of people who are very angry with them right now. So they're their customers and they're staying their customers because they don't want to mess about or can't change their phone contract right now. But people remember. People remember when a company puts its prices up in the middle of a crisis. People remember when a company sends inappropriate texts. People remember when a company changes which countries are covered under free calls and during a crisis time. And come back to the banks, people remember which banks were good to them in this time. People remember which banks put up the overdraft fees at this time. People remember when banks make all their overdrafts free. People remember how they are treated during a crisis. So there are some businesses and some people who are using this time to put their prices up, which may not be a good idea. And the supermarkets in England had their record month in March. They made more money in March than they've ever made, as we could see from the empty shelves. And still, they put their prices up. And you may argue that they have more staff, they have to do this and that and the other. Yes, probably. But they had their busiest months in March. And I go into the supermarket and I see that the price of this has gone up by 15p and the price of that's gone up by 20. And I say, okay, I see that. So, I'm buying what I need now, and the chances are I'm going to keep buying just what I need. But we remember these things. And this is so important when it comes to work, because, work is about relationships. Whether it's housework or whether it's, if you spent all day mopping the floor, you're going to remember who comes in and muddies it up. That's about as basic as it gets. I remember, sometimes I've been contacted by people now who I've worked for before, and I remember how long I spent with them to try and sort things out before, and I remember, and I know who are my good clients. And that's the other thing about being a good customer as well. For example, we look very simply at supermarkets, and people say, well, we know who are the people who come in and who've been giving the people behind the counter a hard time. We know who our dodgy customers are. We know who are the ones that have been pocketing stuff. We know who are the ones. And you don't forget that. And I'm very pleased to say when I go to the supermarket, they're really nice to me, because I'm always really nice to them. And they're actually even nice to me when I'm all stressed out and I'm going, I don't like it. And they go, no, darling, we don't like it either, but we have to work here. And I'm like, I'm so sorry for you. And they go, I'm so sorry for you. And we have a really quite nice time. And the work that we do can sometimes just be favours that we do for friends when we drop something off, or even maybe we look after somebody's kids, and that doesn't go away. So a lot of the riches that a lot of us have right now may not be money in the bank. A lot of the riches, I want to say Twitter, don't. A lot of the riches that we have right now are the relationships that we have. A lot of the riches that we have right now are continuing in terms of us helping each other out, but also being aware that people say to us, if you need anything, let me know. If I can help, let me know. And that's worth so much. It's really worth so much. And those good relationships continue with companies where people can say, let me know if you need some help. Let me know if you need more time to pay. Let me know if you need credit. And that's fantastic if somebody can say that to you. And it's not, well, we can't do this because the boss says no. We can't do this because, no. I'm the boss. I have the power to do this and change this. I have the power to offer you this or deny you this. And business is human, work is human. There's nothing more human. And there's a lot of wisdom that's been around for a while, fairly recently, about passive income. And I had a lady contact me on Facebook, and another Zumba instructor, and I have enough experience in this area to know that when somebody decides to contact me privately and how are you? Thinking, she's going to try and sell me something. I said, I'm fine, how are you? Chat, 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 And there's a lot of people saying that, that's great, but generally what they'll do is they'll do it, post on post. How are you guys over there in England? Yeah, okay. When somebody does it in a private message who I've not spoken to before, I'm like, Yes, bounce. That. I'm thinking, I'm so suspicious. I'm so suspicious. I get an email. Have you ever thought about expanding into passive income, which online does? No. And it's hard because in terms of selling, there's a lot of people who've taught how to be in business and how to create an industry and how to do this, where you engage someone, you start talking to somebody, chat, and then I'll sell you something. Chat. And I particularly like the way we're taught to use somebody's name. Hi pal, chat. Have you ever thought about investing in chat? Well, I want to talk to you about a charity that I'm trying to get some funding for at the moment. Okay, see where this is going. And you can see just from the way I'm talking and this kind of thing, it's like I've been talking about work and business for more than a half an hour now. And if I talk about what I do, when I say, hey, I'm going to teach some Zumba classes, I'll put the word out, I'll email, I'll put it on things, everyone go, right, this is the time, this is the thing, this is how much it costs, I'm not selling, I'm delivering. I'm spreading the word, I'm saying this is what I've got and this is what I do. Maybe I do need to sell, maybe I do. But generally what I do is I just tell people, and they tell their friends, and they tell their other friends. And I'm not denying the power of, letting people know what you're doing. But at the moment, a lot of the adverts I'm seeing, and they're kind of like out of date already. They're from a previous world. And it's important that we remind ourselves and we look at things, try and look at things clearly, and let go of any assumptions, concepts that don't serve us anymore. Let go of I'm an employee. Let go of I'm self-employed. Let go of this is the only way that I can accept money. And also, if we are going to reach out and do things for people in a new way, it's okay to take money from that. It's okay to take work for tips. It's okay to take some food from somebody. You might be doing somebody a favor and they say, look, let me bake you, let me give you some food, let me give you something there. Yes, that's fine, isn't it? But if we have a very structured idea of like, oh no, I can't take money from this, I can't do this. Most of my money when I'm teaching comes from older people, it can come from disabled people. I serve them, I work for them. I've also worked in care and social care, and I'm more than happy to take money for doing that, for working for people who need somebody right now, and I'm quite happy with that. And I'm just trying to remember, something popped onto my head. And in a weird kind of way, there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are about seeing where systems are broken, seeing where things are broken. And so a big part of that has been seeing where our social care, our system of taking care of people when they are having difficulty, when they are sick, when they're disabled, when they're out of work, has been broken. And so we need to try and fix that. And one of the things that popped up on my radar a little while ago was when a pay rise for nurses was voted down in the House of Commons recently. And that's been played quite a bit, And you sort of think, yeah, how do you feel about that decision now? How do those MPs feel about that decision now? And I would hope that Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister of England, of the UK, will think quite differently about it, as he came out of hospital and was talking about the incredible nurses who saved his life in the ICU. And I really hope that all of the MPs, and I'm looking at you now, will arrange for a pay rise for the nurses and other healthcare workers, including and especially the cleaners, immediately. And not wait till this crisis is over, and not, when this crisis is over, forget about them. Forget about giving them the support that they need when this is over. Because right now we're honouring their work. Right now we are in awe. We are bowing down to these incredible workers and what they do. But people can have very short memories, you know. And one of the things, it's a funny thing I always used to think, and it was a strange thing because it popped up the other day, I thought, how can we live in a society in England where nurses are paid so much less than footballers? And I would go and why you check this? I read it very quickly the other day, and there's a sort of things we meant about. It seems that the people in the Premiership, I think it's the Premiership League, the footballers, have all decided that their salaries need to go to the NHS, and they need to donate those monies to the NHS. And so they're going to figure out how to do that, and they're in the process of doing that at the moment. And I think, well done, good job. I think that's a very good idea. And those footballers are sitting, and not working, not able to do the job, that they're supposed to be doing. And yet the nurses are working so hard. So I applaud them. I applaud the footballers for taking that initiative, and I hope that works out really well. But I want to bring this back a little bit to you, because chances are you're not a nurse, chances are you're not a doctor, chances are you're not a fitness instructor. Chances are you may be somebody whose job may not exist after this virus. So you may be losing something. And it may be something that you spent a long time and a lot of money being educated in how to do. And I would just say that it's so important to find that freedom of thinking, I am a this, I am a that. In England, and probably in a lot of countries around the world, one of the first things that we always get asked at a dinner party or something is, what do you do? What do you do? And we're kind of luckier now because more and more people get to say things like, and I love this, I was watching Hitch the other day, I'm a consultant. That's what I say, I'm a consultant. I'm actually a communications consultant. I communicate when I teach Zumba, and I communicate when I work on writing. I'm communicating right now. And if you saw my first introductory video, you'll see that I talked a lot about how I phrase and frame what I do. And it can be very, very hard when suddenly we have to shift and move away from something we thought we might do for the rest of our lives. And it can feel, we can often experience a bereavement and grief when we have to let go of a job or a career or a profession. But you are not your job. And it's okay, it's natural, it's, very common to experience feelings of grief and bereavement, because it feels like we're losing a job, but it also feels like we're losing part of ourselves. So the most important thing I would say is, you are not your job. And whatever qualities and skills you had that made you good for that made you able to do that, have not changed. So the world may have changed, and the world may be no longer what it was. But I would urge you as an exercise to examine who you are, what your skills are, what you're good at, and most importantly, how you can serve right now. Maybe you're good at making people laugh. We need some comedians right now. Some quality ones, not some crass ones. Maybe you can dance. Maybe you can become a fitness instructor. Maybe you can retrain to do something that you thought you couldn't do, that maybe you thought you were too old or too something to do. And you see that now, actually there's always a demand for this kind of skill, this kind of talent, this gift that you have. And in my book, The Fear of Success, I talk a lot. Just over a year ago, I went through a period of really desperately looking for work, and I was unable to find any work. And I was literally ringing up to see if I could get a job in a warehouse. And prior to that, I had actually tried to go back to teaching Zumba. And I rented some rooms, and I went and I set up the classes, and I was telling everybody about it. And I was very confident. Because I had run a very successful business in London. Excuse me. And now here I was in this place with loads and loads of older people. The rooms were cheaper. Everybody was so nice. I felt great to teach. I was like, yeah, they don't know. This is going to be so successful. This is going to be brilliant, And I started, and then we had snow. And then I got flu. And it just never happened. I didn't really stand a chance. So if you're out there right now and you're suffering, and you're suffering in a work way, as well as a human way. Obviously I had, that flu that I had back then was, the Australian flu was very deadly also. And I was very lucky to survive that. And that's what I would tell myself. So, okay, well, the business didn't work, but, I'm still alive. But I know how it feels to gear up for me, that was kind of a comeback. I'd already had that career. And I would also, I kind of want to say to you, be careful about trying to go back to things after this is over, because sometimes that's the mistake we make. We think, I was doing this, I was successful, I want to go back to it. But really we need to go forward. So, and last year when I was looking for a job, and I was literally ringing, a company that had warehouse work, and I was saying, and I couldn't do the one or two jobs that they had. There was something that I couldn't do it. And I wrote about this in my book, in that I ended up having to ask for help. I ended up going to the London Book Fair, and I had been doing some work for friends for free in terms of helping them with their books. And a few people, and then suddenly everybody was asking me, to help them with their books, but nobody wanted to sign up and nobody wanted to pay. So I went to the London Book Fair, and I was talking to everybody. I was, talking to the heads of the biggest publishing companies. I was having great, they would mentor me. There was all this great stuff, and everybody was like, oh, wow, you really know what you're doing. I was talking to publishing companies, small publishing companies. Oh yes, we might need somebody to do some editing. Oh yes, where's your card. I was doing the whole thing. I was working so hard, and every day I would just say to myself, just have faith for one more day. Just give your all for one more day. Just do your best one more day. And I went home, and I didn't have a home. I went to where I was staying with, friends, and I just thought, well, I've done everything that I can. And it was like, okay, well, Monday morning I'm going to have to go and sign on to Universal Credit. And this was just over a year ago. And I went, and I'd said to somebody who'd been talking to me, I said, look, and this is the selling part. Actually, I did do selling. I sort of said, I tried to sell to one person who wanted someone. And this guy turned to, and I was like going to him, I was going, it's a special London Book Fair offer if you sign up by by Friday. And he was like, well, I said, well, no, if you sign up by Saturday then, okay, well, by Sunday, you know. And I was like, oh, this guy's never going to sign up. And then I saw that he'd paid for me to do the work for him, and I was like, oh, whew, I don't have to sign up for benefits. I don't have to sign up for welfare. So sometimes there's a moment when we need to make an offer, you know. You talk about this thing, everyone say, "Oh, make your offer." And sometimes that's the thing. I was watching, one of the things that came up to me recently is I was watching on TV, and it was Kramer versus Kramer. And there's a great scene when he's trying to get a job. And I think this is a really good one to watch because he's very talented. He's been working very hard, and that's one of the problems with his. If you watch the film, with his marriage, and his wife leaves him with his son. And so for whatever reason, with his work, he has to adjust his work to try and keep his son. And he ends up in a party. He's pushing, and he's saying, "No, I need a job today. I need a job today. I'll take something that's 2 rungs down from where I used to be. I want a meeting with them now, and I'm telling you, this is your greatest offer, that you get me today for half price. If you wait till the new year, I'm off the table." Because he needs the job to keep his kid. I think that's what's happening, But it's a great, to watch that, and you sort of think, this to me is selling. This to me is somebody who's saying, I need this now. And if you agree this right now, then you get me for half price. And it's an interesting moment, an interesting way of looking at things in terms of how our need. And I think one of the best things, Rumi, who is a great philosopher and was a great spiritual teacher, he always said, embrace your need. Embrace your need. And that if you fall in love with and embrace your need, it will take you places. And I'm not a Zumba instructor because I decided to be a Zumba instructor. I'm a Zumba instructor because I had quit my job, and I was sort of kind of floating around thinking, what do I do next? How do I make any money? How do I pay the mortgage? And I thought, well, I could train as a Zumba instructor, and that will pay the mortgage until I figure out what I'm doing. And that's what I did. And it took me so many places. It kind of freed me from who I thought I was, and it helped me to find all the parts of who I was. It helped me to become a writer in the end. But I'm not just as an instructor. It's not my identity, because I also had to leave that behind. And the things that are true about you, you can't leave behind, so some things that are in you, if you're a nurse, you kind of, as we've seen, even if you're retired, you get asked to come back and be a nurse. If you're a writer, those things stay with you. So it's okay to let go of who you think you are, or even who you are for a moment. And it's okay to be a bit desperate and to maybe do something that you didn't think that you would ever be doing, because sometimes it's the most amazing, incredible thing. I know families where they've had to switch the person who goes out to work. So they thought, one person would be going to work and one person would be staying home, and they switched it around. It was an amazing learning curve for both of the people in that relationship and for the relationship with the children. So free yourself if you can. Free yourself from who you think you are, or whether you're self-employed or a company director or an executive. If you're an executive of a company and you decide you want to go and retrain as a nurse, I bow down to you. Do something useful. Work, according to Kelly L. Gibran, is love made visible. Work is love made visible. So when you bake a cake for somebody, that is love made visible. When I teach a class, it is a lot of love. When I write a book, it's a lot of love. When I drive the car to pick up a pharmacy prescription, that's a lot of love. And sometimes when I kick someone out of my class, that's a lot of love too, when I say no. And when I say, you know, I'll do anything, but not that. That's love too. So I hope this is useful. I hope it helps. We're about an hour now. I hope you like this better. I did it on the iPhone. You know, it worked quite well. Thank you to Vodafone for my iPhone. Despite the negative things I say about you at times, you're not all bad. You've got reasonable coverage, and I rely on you a lot. So let me just close with that. I hope this helps. Let's just... Sometimes Zumba head office drives me nuts. Sometimes Vodafone drives me nuts. Sometimes my mum drives me nuts, even though I kind of work for her, you know. Sometimes our boss drives us nuts. Sometimes our customers drive us nuts. Sometimes doing taxes drives us nuts. Sometimes our third-party platforms on which we publish audiobooks or ebooks or print-on-demand colour books or hardbacks drive us nuts. Sometimes work drives us nuts. But I'm grateful. I am so, so grateful today to be about to teach a class to my friends, you know, because my customers in Zumba have almost always been my friends, become my friends. And I'm so grateful for that relationship. I'm so grateful to give of myself and to be loved and appreciated for that gift. Because there's a whole lot of people that don't want to do Zumba. In my family, like, I don't really get it, you know. This is like, a lot of people in my family are like, no thanks, pal. I don't want to do this. So it's also really important to remember that not everybody is for us. What's for you won't go by you. And I always say that I always end up with the perfect class, the perfect size class, the perfect people come to my class. And I can tell you a lot of stories about that, but I'm going to finish soon. But I know that work is a painful area right now for a lot of people for many, many reasons. And there's a huge shift that we are in the middle of and that needs to happen. And it's so important that we can make a living and that we can pay our rent, our mortgage, to buy food, and that we can be respected and treated well with the way that we work, and be honoured for the things that we do, and honour others for the work that they do. And this is a big subject, and there's a big shift that's happening right now in terms of whose gifts and whose work we're valuing more and less. So if you're struggling with this, you know, sometimes it takes longer than an hour. Sometimes it takes longer than a year. Sometimes it takes a long lifetime to master any kind of profession. And then it kind of goes away like that, you know. But always remember that I think for most of us, there's a way that we can find to serve people. And I think I'm going to finish on this. One of the things, let me tell you who I am and what I do, what my actual role is. And I haven't said this before. I'm a shaman. And there's a great book called The Wisdom of the Shamans by Don Jose Ruiz. And it's definitely worth checking out because, you know, being a shaman is a funny word, you know, and it can be a fitness instructor, it can be a therapist, a psychotherapist, obviously nurses, doctors, anybody who works in healing, that we obviously think of healing. And whatever I do and however I do it, you know, I kind of end up in the right place to serve people and to do things the right way. Or sometimes I just end up somewhere where I learn a lesson and I'm always learning and growing. And sometimes I find myself in a situation where and this happens less because obviously, you know, I'm not going out as much. I go for a walk and I'll find myself sitting somewhere and somebody will come up to me and just, you know, when I was travelling, I would just connect with somebody And it was like my job was just to listen to them, just to let them talk. And just to say one thing, just to pivot one thing, to help them to find their way, or to... Sometimes it was just sitting and listening to somebody. You know, and if you're a therapist, you get paid good money for doing that. So sometimes there are a lot of things that we do, you know, in and of ourselves that we don't charge for, that we don't recognize as a gift. And in this moment, you know, sometimes in my worst moments, when things have been the most difficult, most awful for me, very often I've discovered something special within me that is actually really valuable. The pearl part, the bit that can shine. And very often, and I wrote in my book, there's a chapter called "It's Too Easy," that sometimes we don't recognise the gifts, the skills that we have, because they're just something that comes naturally to us. So we may have been spending a lot of time investing in a business, or working really hard, or getting qualifications. But I believe that every single person out there has incredible gifts and something to offer to this moment, something to offer in this moment. Whether it's painting, whether it's singing, whatever it is. So please don't ever think that you are worthless just because your work, you may not have work, or your work may have been devalued, or it may not exist anymore. You are still somebody with extraordinary gifts. And I'm always coming back to Pretty Woman. I'm always coming back to Pretty Woman and stuff. And there's the line from that which Richard Gere says to Julia Roberts, the character, and she says, you have a lot of special gifts. You have a lot of special gifts. And she says, the bad stuff is easier to believe. So please don't believe the bad stuff. When it comes to work, just remember that you have a lot of special gifts. Okay, I hope it helps. Love you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.